When a little girl offers her lunch to a homeless man everyone avoids, she doesn't imagine that her gesture will trigger a profound change. The next day, the man returns and does something unexpected. The late afternoon bathed the square in a weathered orange hue as adults hurried past without even glancing at the man sitting on the most distant bench. His clothes were torn, a cap hid part of his face, and his vacant stare seemed to bother no one except a little girl with braids, who stopped beside her mother to look closer. She clutched the brown paper-wrapped snack tightly against her chest. Her stomach growled softly, but curiosity, or maybe guilt, was louder. Amid the flow of passers-by, his gaze met hers for a second, sad, tired, but still human. Something lit up inside her at that moment, something she couldn't explain. As her mother tugged her arm to keep walking, the girl turned back with a sigh, hesitating to let go of that sad look that held her like an invisible thread. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from a strange shame at feeling pity when everyone else seemed to see nothing there. She bit her lower lip before slowly freeing herself from her mother's hand, taking 2 careful steps toward the bench. She felt eyes burning into her back, her mother's muffled "Don't go" echoing behind her, but she ignored it, guided by something as simple as it was devastating, the certainty that he was hungry. She held out the snack with both trembling hands, trying to smile, but the gesture came out crooked, almost sad. The man slowly lifted his eyes, as if he couldn't believe it was for him, his calloused hands hesitating in the air before accepting it. When he finally took it, he murmured something almost inaudible, his voice cracked from dryness and shame. She smiled more confidently, feeling warmth in her chest, but soon lowered her eyes, afraid to face what she'd done, as if it wasn't allowed to feel happy about such a small act. Her mother, watching from afar, walked over with firm steps, gripping the girl's shoulder with a force that mixed fear and irritation. Her tone cut through the moment like a blade, filled with harshness that left no room for questions. The girl tried to protest, but the hand tightened too much, and her mother's eyes stayed locked on the man, who now just lowered his head, the snack on his lap, avoiding any confrontation. The girl felt her face burn with shame, tears stinging the corners of her eyes, not from regret, but from not knowing how to explain why it had felt right. The walk back home felt heavy, as if the air itself had grown denser. The girl dragged her feet along the cracked sidewalk, feeling her mother's silence like a punishment harsher than any shout. She held the crumpled paper from the now empty snack, staring at the ground as if searching for a justification that could ease her embarrassment. But there was nothing to say, and the muffled traffic noises seemed to mock the awkward distance between them. At home, the strong smell of coffee mixed with the tension, creating a suffocating atmosphere. Her mother braced her hands on the sink, back turned, trying to steady a voice trembling more with fear than anger. When she finally turned, her face flushed, the girl trembled before her mother's fury, but kept her eyes down, fists clenched to hold back tears, unable to erase the image of the man thanking her. The bedroom door shut with a dry click, sealing the girl in a cocoon of hurt. She curled up on the edge of the bed, hugging her knees, letting the tears fall silently, as if she wished no one would ever hear them. Outside, the sun was setting, filling the room with long shadows that seemed to grow and swallow her. Between quiet sobs, she squeezed her eyes shut, forcing herself to remember his look. There had been no malice, only hunger and exhaustion. When the crying stopped, she wiped her face with the back of her hands, feeling the hot, sticky skin left by dried tears. She stayed silent for a long time, eyes fixed on nothing, as if trying to solve a problem far bigger than her age allowed. Finally, she took a deep breath and shook her head firmly. She wouldn't regret it. Even if her mother didn't understand, even if no one thought it was right, she knew what she had seen in his eyes, and no one could take away her certainty that she had done what was right. The next day began gray and damp, the weight of the previous night still on her shoulders as she dressed in silence. The walk to school was slow, head down, her mind circling around her shame and the strange certainty she had done the right thing. In class, she tried to follow instructions, but the letters on the board blurred together. The man's face kept appearing in her memory, no longer dirty and sad, but grateful and fragile. The thought unsettled her more than any lesson. At recess, the sounds of children running and laughing felt distant. Only when she looked at the school gate did the world stop. He was there, standing clean, dressed in modest but neat clothes, his face shaved, hair combed. She froze, heart pounding, unable to process the contrast with the day before. A confused mix of relief and fear filled her chest. He no longer looked invisible or broken, but still felt out of place in that childish setting. Children began to notice his presence, whispers spreading like a collective murmur, filled with curiosity and barely contained scorn. Some adults frowned, their discomfort obvious in the way they avoided holding his gaze. The girl shrank into herself, feeling crushed under the weight of those stares. It was as if everyone knew what she'd done the day before and expected her to explain or feel ashamed, even though they knew nothing of the real story. She moved slowly, pulled by something inside her she couldn't explain. She walked toward the gate, each step heavier than the last, feeling the hard ground under her school shoes as a reminder there was no turning back. When she finally stopped near him, she kept her eyes lowered, aware that he was watching her with a calm that didn't match the place or the situation. The tension around them thinned into an uncomfortable silence, as if the world were holding its breath to see what would happen next. They moved away from the gate and curious eyes, walking in silence to a quieter corner of the school where the chaos of recess couldn't reach them. The girl's stomach twisted with anticipation and a soft fear, as if she were carrying a secret she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. The man walked beside her with a carefulness that felt heavier than any words. His steps were calm, but his gaze held something painful, as if he carried his past on his shoulders and was finally ready to unpack it for someone. They sat on an old wooden bench, surrounded by trees filtering sunlight into thin, flickering beams. He kept his eyes down for a few seconds, fingers pressing into his knee, before beginning to explain who he really was. There was a stiffness in his posture that didn't come from coldness, but from shame and the effort not to break. His story was one of a man who had lost everything through misplaced trust, betrayed by those who had sworn loyalty, and who had ended up on the street as a ghost of his former self. The mother arrived in a rush, calling her daughter with a harsh gesture that left no room for argument, her face tense with fear and suspicion. She paused when she saw the man so clean and composed, but the discomfort in her eyes betrayed her firm judgment. She tried to keep her distance, but the tension was palpable, almost solid, as he calmly shared his story. The girl felt her chest tighten as she saw her mother wrestling internally, unsure whether to believe him, recognizing in her eyes a mirror of her own conflict. Even without direct words of comfort or apology, the man made it clear this wasn't just venting, it was a commitment. There was something in the way he stood, adjusting his simple clothes with newly reclaimed dignity, that suggested a larger purpose. The girl watched in silence, holding her breath as if afraid to break the moment. In her heart, something flickered, an uncomfortable but stubborn hope that what had begun with a piece of bread might end in something much bigger and more transformative. The next day, the girl's mother agreed to meet in a modest cafe near the school, still suspicious but pushed by curiosity and the strange moral obligation weighing on her. The man arrived on time, wearing the same clean clothes as before, his face calm but lined with worry. The girl sat beside her mother, legs swinging lightly under the chair as the room seemed to grow quiet around them. Everything felt too ordinary for the gravity of the moment, as if the world hadn't noticed the weight they all carried. He explained slowly and carefully that he didn't want charity or pity, but the chance to repay an invisible debt he felt he owed the girl. In his eyes was a silent plea for them to listen with open hearts, free of the barriers that both protected and imprisoned them. The proposal was direct yet delicate, to pay for her to attend a better school, to offer the kind of opportunity he himself had lost when pride and recklessness left him vulnerable to betrayal. He spoke like someone who understood the value of second chances because he knew the cost of not having one. The mother crossed her arms and looked away, trying to hide the silent battle raging inside her. Accepting meant admitting they needed help, that someone else could give what she could not, and that wounded a pride as hard as stone. The girl, meanwhile, clenched her hands in her lap, heart racing, sensing the conflict without knowing how to resolve it. She didn't want to see the man humiliated again, or her mother bowed by need, and felt that any choice would hurt someone. In the end, the mother took a deep breath, eyelids wet with emotion she fought to contain. The hand that had been firm on her arm now trembled slightly as it rested on the table, offering a fragile truce. The girl leaned back in her chair, feeling a weight lift from her chest even if she couldn't put it into words. The man simply lowered his eyes in relief, respecting the loaded silence of gratitude and embarrassment that settled between them, a quiet pact of hope and change. The morning began with a strange stillness, as if the world were holding its breath before allowing a new beginning. The girl woke earlier than usual, putting on the clean, neatly pressed uniform her mother had carefully prepared night before. The smell of fresh coffee and bread filled the house, but there was also a silent nervousness hanging in the corners, almost tangible. Her mother moved through the kitchen more gently, trying to smile, though her eyes showed a mix of exhaustion and relief, as if accepting they had finally found help. Arriving at the new school felt like crossing a portal into a world that had previously existed only in colorful brochures handed out at the gate. Freshly painted walls, a large courtyard, stacks of new books, everything seemed to shine with promise. Her mother handled the paperwork with a furrowed brow, reading each line with extreme care, unwilling to admit her hands were trembling. The girl watched in silence, feeling both small and vast, as if the moment was too big for her years to hold. After the enrollment was done, they walked together to the gate where he waited, standing neatly dressed and more reserved than ever. There were no grand gestures or loud celebrations, just a long moment in which they all exchanged a silent understanding. The mother gave a barely noticeable nod, and he lowered his head in acknowledgement, respecting the need for discretion. The girl stood step behind, gripping her backpack tightly, her chest filled with a strange feeling she didn't know how to name, but suspected was gratitude. A few days later, they met again on the same bench in the square, the sun gentler and the wind playing with dry leaves on the ground. The girl walked toward him with firm steps, balancing a carefully wrapped snack, repeating the gesture that had started all. He accepted without hesitation, but this time his eyes weren't dull. They held a discreet brightness that reflected restored dignity. They sat side by side in silence, sharing the snack not as beggar and benefactor, but as two people united by a simple, powerful pact, the certainty that a single act of kindness could change more than one life. Tell me in the comments what rating you'd give this story, and I'll see you in the video on the screen.